The DNA test that solved a 50-year-old kidnapping, how a spit kit revealed the truth about a man who wasn't who he thought he was. His name was David Carter, and he was 60 years old when he spit into a plastic tube on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in November. He did it because his daughter bought him the kit for Christmas the year before, and it had been sitting on his kitchen counter for 11 months, gathering dust. "Come on, Dad," she kept saying. "Everyone's doing it. Don't you want to know where we came from?" David didn't particularly care where he came from. He knew where he came from, Cleveland, Ohio. He knew his parents, Frank and Mildred Carter, both deceased. He knew his childhood, ordinary, unremarkable, filled with baseball games and school projects and summer vacations to Lake Erie. He knew his life, 3 decades as an accountant, 1 wife, deceased, 2 children, both grown, and a retirement spent golfing and complaining about the weather. There was nothing mysterious about David Carter. Or so he believed. 6 weeks later, an email arrived that would unravel everything. "Your Ancestry DNA results are ready." David clicked the link. With mild curiosity, expecting the usual breakdown of British and German ancestry that seems to populate every white American's results. Instead, he found something that made his coffee grow cold in his mug. At the top of his DNA matches list was a name he didn't recognize, Patricia Walsh. And beneath her name, the relationship label that would change everything, close family, first cousin. David didn't have a first cousin named Patricia Walsh. He didn't have any cousins named Patricia. In fact, his father was an only child, and his mother had 1 brother who died childless in the 1980s. There was no possible way he had a first cousin. Unless. He stared at the screen for 20 minutes. Then he picked up his phone and called his daughter. "Sarah," he said, his voice strange even to his own ears. "That DNA test you gave me? Something's not right." This is the story of how a 60-year-old retired accountant discovered that he was not David Carter at all, that he had been living someone else's life for 5 decades, that the parents who raised him were strangers, and that a crime committed half a century ago had finally found its resolution through a saliva sample and a database. It's a story about identity, about the lies we tell ourselves and the truths that DNA cannot hide. And it's a story that would make headlines across America, because the truth, when it finally emerged, was more shocking than anyone could have imagined. To understand what happened to David Carter, you have to go back to 1965. It was a different America then, the height of the civil rights movement, the British invasion on the radio, and a nation captivated by the space race. In a small town outside Pittsburgh called Greensburg, a 3-year-old boy named Matthew Walsh vanished from his front yard on a warm September afternoon. His mother, Diane Walsh, had gone inside to answer the phone. She was gone for less than 5 minutes. When she returned, Matthew was gone. The police searched for weeks. The FBI got involved. Flyers were distributed across 3 states. Matthew's face appeared on milk cartons and in newspaper articles. Diane Walsh never stopped hoping. She never stopped searching. She died in 2015, at the age of 72, still believing that somewhere out there, her little boy was alive. What Diane never knew, what no one knew, was that Matthew Walsh was alive. He was living in Cleveland, Ohio, with a couple named Frank and Mildred Carter. He was being raised as their son, David. He went to school, played baseball, fell in love, got married, had children. He lived an ordinary American life. And he had absolutely no memory of his first 3 years, no recollection of a mother named Diane, no awareness that his entire existence was built on a crime. Frank and Mildred Carter were dead by the time David took his DNA test. Frank died in 1998, Mildred in 2005. They took their secrets to the grave, or so they thought. They couldn't have anticipated that decades later, a simple saliva test would expose everything. Patricia Walsh was 58 years old when she got the notification from Ancestry. She'd taken the test 2 years earlier, hoping to find information about her family's Irish roots. She'd found plenty of distant cousins, people she'd never heard of, the usual genetic connections that span centuries. But when the notification popped up, new DNA match, first cousin, she clicked with genuine excitement. The name was David Carter. She didn't recognize it. She clicked on his profile. No family tree attached. No photo. Just a name and a location, Cleveland, Ohio. Patricia messaged him immediately, "Hi. It says we're first cousins. I'm trying to figure out how we're connected. Do you know any Walshes from the Pittsburgh area?" David replied within hours. "I don't know any Walshes. My parents were Frank and Mildred Carter from Cleveland. I've never heard of anyone named Walsh in my family." Patricia frowned at the screen. Ancestry's relationship predictions aren't random. First cousins share a set of grandparents. That means David's parent and Patricia's parent were siblings. So either David's father was Patricia's uncle, or David's mother was Patricia's aunt. But David claimed no connection to the Walsh family. How was that possible? She called her older brother, Michael. "Hey, do we have any relatives in Cleveland?" Michael laughed. "Not that I know of." "Why?" Patricia explained about the DNA match. Michael was quiet for a moment. "That's weird. Mom always said our family was small. Dad was an only child, remember? And Mom had just that one brother who died young. Then how do I have a first cousin in Cleveland?" Neither of them had an answer. But Michael, a retired police officer, had a detective's instincts. "Let me look into this," he said. "Something doesn't add up." Michael Walsh started where any good detective would, with the facts. He pulled up his family tree. His father, Thomas Walsh, had one sister named Diane, Patricia's mother. Diane had one child, Matthew, who disappeared in 1965. Diane spent the rest of her life searching for him, never giving up hope, never finding answers. She died with that pain still fresh. Michael had been 12 years old when his cousin Matthew vanished. He remembered the chaos, the fear, the way his Aunt Diane crumbled and then rebuilt herself around the hope of finding her son. He remembered the flyers, the phone calls, the detectives coming and going. He remembered how the case went cold, year after year, until it became just another unsolved missing child file in a drawer somewhere. Now here was a DNA match claiming to be a first cousin. A man in Cleveland, Ohio. A man who was 60 years old, exactly the age Matthew Walsh would be if he were alive. Michael's heart started pounding. He picked up the phone and called Patricia. "I think we found Matthew." Patricia was silent for a long moment. "That's impossible," she whispered. "He disappeared. He was 3 years old." "I know," Michael said. "But think about it. The age matches. He's in Cleveland, that's only a few hours from Pittsburgh. And he has no idea who we are. What if someone took him and raised him as their own?" The possibility was so staggering, so horrifying, and so hopeful all at once that Patricia couldn't process it. "We need to be sure," she said finally. "We can't just call this man and tell him his whole life is a lie without proof." Michael agreed. He started digging. Michael Walsh spent 2 weeks investigating before he made the call. He combed through old newspaper archives, looking for any connection between Pittsburgh and Cleveland, any mention of the Carter family, any clue that might explain how a missing child ended up with strangers. He found nothing. Frank and Mildred Carter were, on paper, perfectly ordinary people. He'd worked at a factory. She'd been a homemaker. They had no criminal record, no history of violence, nothing that would suggest they were capable of kidnapping a child. But Michael also found something else, a photograph. The Carter family had a Christmas photo published in their local newspaper in 1967. It showed Frank, Mildred, and a 5-year-old boy identified as David. Michael stared at that little face for a long time. Then he pulled out the old missing persons flyer for Matthew Walsh. The flyer showed a 3-year-old with dark hair and a gap-toothed smile. The boy in the Christmas photo had the same eyes, the same shape of face, the same expression. It wasn't proof. But it was enough. Michael called David Carter on a Thursday evening. He introduced himself, explained who he was, and then said the words that would shatter a man's world. "I believe you might be my cousin Matthew Walsh. You disappeared from Pittsburgh in 1965. Your mother spent her whole life looking for you." David later told reporters that he nearly dropped the phone. "I thought it was a prank," he said. "Some kind of scam. You hear about these things, people trying to steal your identity." But the more he talked, the more I realized, he wasn't lying. He knew things. He knew my birthday. He knew details about my childhood that no stranger could know. And I kept thinking, my parents are dead. I can't ask them. I can't confront them. I have no way of knowing if this is true. But David did have a way of knowing. He had his DNA. David agreed to take a second DNA test, this time, one that would be analyzed by a genetic genealogist who specialized in identifying unknown relatives. The results came back 3 weeks later. They were conclusive. David Carter was a 99.97% match to the Walsh family. His biological mother was Diane Walsh. His biological father was Thomas Walsh. He was, without any doubt, the little boy who had vanished from a front yard in Pennsylvania 55 years earlier. David sat alone in his living room and read the report 3 times. Then he wept. "I didn't know what to feel," he told a reporter later. "Part of me was overjoyed. I had a family I never knew about, cousins, aunts, uncles. Part of me was devastated. My mother, my real mother, died without ever knowing what happened to me. And part of me was angry. Furious. The people who raised me, the people I called mom and dad, they stole me. They took me from my real family and let me grow up thinking I was someone else. The anger was the hardest part. Frank and Mildred Carter were dead. He couldn't confront them. He couldn't ask why. He couldn't demand answers. He was left with a lifetime of questions and no one to answer them. I keep thinking about my mother, my biological mother," David said. "She spent 55 years wondering where I was. She never stopped hoping. And I was living 3 hours away the whole time. I went to college. I got married. I had kids. I lived this whole life while she was dying inside. And I didn't know. I couldn't have known. But it still breaks my heart." The meeting happened 3 months after that first phone call. Patricia and Michael Walsh drove to Cleveland to meet the man who was their first cousin, but emotionally, it felt like finding a long-lost brother. They'd grown up hearing about Matthew, staring at his photograph, wondering what happened to him. Now here he was, a flesh-and-blood person with his own children and his own life. They met at a small restaurant halfway between Cleveland and Pittsburgh. David arrived first. He sat in a booth near the window, his hands shaking, his heart pounding. He'd spent the last 3 months learning everything he could about the Walsh family, looking at old photographs, reading news articles about his own disappearance, trying to absorb the reality of a life that should have been his. When Patricia and Michael walked in, David stood up. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Patricia crossed the distance between them and threw her arms around him. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You look just like Mom. You look just like Diane." They talked for 6 hours. David learned about his biological mother, her kindness, her stubbornness, the way she never gave up searching. He learned about his father, who died of a heart attack in 1990, never knowing what happened to his son. He learned about his own disappearance, the flyers, the searches, the way the case haunted the family for decades. And he learned something else: Diane Walsh had never stopped hoping. On her deathbed, she'd looked at Patricia and whispered, "Find him. Promise me you'll find him." Patricia had promised, though she never thought the promise would lead anywhere. And now, through a DNA test and a database, that promise was fulfilled. "I kept my word, Mom," Patricia said quietly, looking up at the ceiling. "I found him." David's discovery didn't just reunite a family, it reopened a criminal investigation that had been cold for more than half a century. The FBI took interest immediately. If David was taken in 1965, that meant Frank and Mildred Carter were kidnappers. But they were dead. Who else was involved? How did they take a child without anyone noticing? And why? Agents descended on Cleveland, searching through the Carters' old house, now occupied by new owners, interviewing neighbors who remembered the family, trying to piece together a crime that happened 55 years ago. What they found was fragmentary but chilling. A neighbor, now in her 90s, recalled that Frank Carter had shown up with a toddler unexpectedly in late 1965. "He told us the boy was his sister's child," she said. "Said his sister had passed away and he was raising the little one. We didn't think anything of it. People did that back then, took in family when something happened." Another neighbor remembered that the boy, David, seemed scared for the first few months. "He used to cry at night," she said. "I could hear it through the walls. It went on for weeks. But after a while, he settled down. He seemed happy enough." There was no evidence that Frank and Mildred had any accomplices. It appeared that Frank, for reasons unknown, had driven to Pennsylvania, spotted a toddler playing alone in a yard, and simply taken him. It was that random. That senseless. That cruel. "Why?" David asked, over and over. "Why me? Why did they do it?" The FBI couldn't answer that question. Maybe Frank and Mildred wanted a child and couldn't have one. Maybe they saw an opportunity and took it. Maybe there was some twisted logic that died with them. David would never know. The story made national news. "DNA test solves 55-year-old kidnapping case," was the headline on every major outlet. David appeared on morning shows, evening news, and primetime specials. He told his story with a mixture of grief, wonder, and bewilderment. "I'm 60 years old," he said on Good Morning America. "I've lived my whole life as David Carter. I have children, grandchildren. And now I'm supposed to be someone else. I don't know how to be Matthew Walsh. I don't know how to reconcile the life I lived with the life I should have had." His children struggled too. They'd grown up believing they were Carters, with a family tree that stretched back to Cleveland. Now they discovered they were Walshes, connected to a whole different branch of relatives in Pittsburgh. They gained cousins, aunts, and uncles overnight, but they also lost the grandparents they'd loved, who turned out to be criminals. "My kids are angry," David admitted. "They loved Frank and Mildred. They were good grandparents to them. How do you explain that the same people who loved you also stole your father? How do you hold both truths at once?" The Walsh family tried to embrace David and his children. Thanksgiving that year was a massive gathering in Pittsburgh, with David meeting dozens of relatives he never knew existed. It was joyful and awkward and heartbreaking all at once. David's daughter Sarah later described it as the best and weirdest holiday of my life. "We sat at a table with people we'd never met, eating turkey and looking at old photos," she said. "And every photo, my dad would say, 'That's my mother. That's my real mother.' He'd never said that before. He'd never had a real mother to talk about. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time." One of the most emotional moments came when David visited his biological mother's grave for the first time. Diane Walsh was buried in a small cemetery outside Pittsburgh, beneath a headstone that read simply, "Diane Walsh, 1943 to 2015. Beloved Mother. Forever searching." David stood at the grave for a long time, silent. Then he knelt down and placed his hand on the cold stone. "I'm here, Mom," he whispered. "I'm here. I'm sorry I couldn't find you sooner. I'm sorry you spent your whole life looking for me. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." Patricia stood behind him, weeping. "She would be so happy," she said. "She never stopped believing you were alive. She used to say, 'I feel him out there. I know he's out there.' And you were. You were always out there." David visited his father's grave as well, Thomas Walsh, who died in 1990. He talked to the headstone, telling this stranger about his life, his children, his regrets. "I wish I could have known you," he said. "I wish you could have known me. I wish a lot of things." Then came the hardest visit of all, Frank and Mildred Carter's graves. They were buried in Cleveland, in a quiet cemetery not far from the house where David grew up. He stood before their headstones, filled with emotions he couldn't name. "I loved you," he said quietly. "You were my parents. You raised me. You gave me a good life. But you also stole me. You took me from a mother who loved me and let her spend 55 years wondering what happened to her son. I don't know how to forgive that. I don't know if I can forgive that. I don't know if I'm supposed to." He left the cemetery without looking back. David's story is not unique. Across America, DNA testing is revealing secrets that were buried for decades: kidnappings, adoptions, affairs, and crimes that would have remained hidden forever if not for a little plastic tube and a database. According to recent estimates, more than 40 million Americans have taken direct-to-consumer DNA tests, creating a massive genetic network that law enforcement and genealogists can tap into. In David's case, it was a simple cousin match that cracked the case. In other cases, it's been distant relatives, second cousins 3 times removed, people who share less than 1% of their DNA but enough to build a family tree. Genetic genealogy has solved dozens of cold cases, from unidentified bodies to serial killers to missing children. The same technology that helped David find his family has also helped reunite siblings separated by adoption, identify victims of human trafficking, and even catch criminals who thought they'd gotten away. It's a powerful tool, but it also raises difficult questions about privacy, consent, and the right to know versus the right not to know. David thinks about these questions often. "I didn't ask for this," he says. "I didn't want to know that my life was a lie. But now that I know, I can't unknow. I can't go back. And part of me is grateful. I have a new family, a new understanding of who I am. But part of me wishes I'd never spit into that tube." His daughter Sarah disagrees. "The truth is always better," she says firmly. "Even when it hurts. Even when it's hard. My dad deserved to know who he really is. My grandmother deserved to have her son found, even if she didn't live to see it. And those people who took him? They don't get to control the narrative forever. DNA doesn't lie." 2 years after the discovery, David is still adjusting. He's changed his name legally to David Walsh Carter, honoring both families. He spends holidays in Pittsburgh now, surrounded by cousins and nieces and nephews who feel like strangers and family all at once. He's learning the Walsh family history, looking at old photographs, trying to piece together the childhood he should have had. "I'll never fully be Matthew Walsh," he says. "I missed too much. I missed my mother's life. I missed my father's death. I missed 55 years of family gatherings, inside jokes, shared memories. You can't get that back. But I can build something new. I can be part of their future, even if I wasn't part of their past." Patricia and Michael have become his anchors in this new world. They talk on the phone every week, visit when they can, send photos and stories and pieces of the family history. They've embraced David's children as their own nieces and nephews, creating a blended family that spans 2 states and 5 decades of separation. "We lost so much time," Patricia says. "But we're making up for it now. We're not going to waste another moment." As for Frank and Mildred Carter, David still struggles with mixed feelings. He loved them. He can't stop loving them just because he learned the truth. But he also can't forgive them. The two truths coexist inside him, contradictory and unresolved. I think about what my life would have been if they hadn't taken me, he says. Would I have been happier? I don't know. Would I have been the same person? Definitely not. I am who I am because of them, for better or worse. And I have to find a way to live with that. David still has the original DNA test kit box. It sits on a shelf in his living room, next to a photograph of Diane Walsh, his real mother, the woman who searched for him until her dying day. Sometimes he looks at the box and marvels at how something so small could unravel a lifetime of lies. 55 years, he says. 55 years of secrets. 55 years of a mother wondering where her son was. 55 years of me living someone else's life. And it all came down to a little plastic tube and a database. He's become something of an advocate for DNA testing now, speaking at conferences and appearing on panels about genetic genealogy. He wants people to understand both the power and the danger of these tests. They can reunite families, solve crimes, uncover truths, but they can also shatter identities, expose secrets, and open wounds that never fully heal. Be prepared, he tells everyone who asks. Be prepared for anything. The truth might set you free, but it might also break your heart. And once you know, you can't go back. You can never go back. But when asked if he regrets taking the test, David pauses. He looks at the photograph of Diane Walsh, the mother he never knew, the mother who never stopped loving him. He thinks about Patricia and Michael, about the new family he's gained, about the truth that finally emerged after all these years. No, he says quietly. I don't regret it. My mother deserved to be found. I deserve to know who I really am. And those people who took me? They don't get to win. The truth wins. DNA wins. And now, finally, I know where I come from. He smiles, a little sadly, a little hopefully. I just wish she could have been here to see it. I wish she could have known that her little boy was okay. That he grew up, had a family, lived a life. That he was always out there, just like she believed. And that in the end, love found a way.